Welcome back to the Right Wave Audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we are going to go over the 8K capable Denon AV receivers that they've released since June of 2020. Now, of course, over that period, they had some stumbling blocks, and we'll cover those. But it seems like they're on a good path now. So this is their flagship AVR A110, which was September of 2020, the AVR X8500 HA, which is the newest model from June of 2021, the X6700H, the X4700H, the X3700H, the X2700H, and the S960H, all from June of 2020. So let's get into this lineup. We're not going to cover the non-8K models. We assume that those, well, may still be available, won't be in their portfolio for much longer. It all starts with their flagship 110 anniversary model. So this is commemorating 110 years of the Denon Corporation. Of course, it's gone through inceptions with different ownerships, but they have a long heritage. And so this model is their flagship. It's a $6,000 unit, so it is pricey, but it does look the part. It is a nice clean look, and the cosmetics vary slightly from the other models, but you can see from the inside of this is very clean, very well built unit. Gives you 13 channels at 150 watts each. Course, rated 2 channels driven, so they say that something like 70% of that is what you actually get if all channels are driven. So they're usually pretty close to that, so or a little above. So Denon specs are not too far off from the published versions. And we'll get into this further, but let's look at the other models. And if we go down to the next one in the chain, so going from a $6,000 unit, the A8, the A110, moving one model down the line to the X8500 HA, which is $4,500. So $1,500 less than their flagship anniversary model. We see a unit that looks just about the same with a few color variations on the front and back panels, but the layout looks the same, the number of I/O, the specifications. This is a 13-channel, 150-watt unit, 15 channels of processing. So all very similar. This was released, about a half a year later, but otherwise a very comparable unit. So unless you want that kind of good feeling that you have the anniversary model, perhaps this is a nice compromise with very similar, I think, the same specifications, just different cosmetics. You could save yourself $1,500. And the line continues there with the X6700H, and this goes down to the next tier of product. Of the layout of the boards are different here. We'll do a side-by-side comparison later. But you can see that some of the elements do remain the same, with the same pull-open door that exposes the additional controls. So if you do have this in a equipment rack and you can't see the on-screen display and you don't have a tablet handy, you can still get to a lot of functions, or you can even have the remote handy. Personally, we've always, Right Wave Audio has always hasn't been a big fan of the doors, particularly when the phono jack is hidden behind there, which means that door has to be open if you're plugging in the headphones. So at least put those on the outside, that's what we ask. You do move down in channel count here, so the amplification is only 11 channels, 140 watts into 2 channels, 8 ohms. But it's still 15 channels of processing, and we'll show you later how you can use external amplification in combination with this to and get that use of that full processing. With the 6700H at $3,000, again you drop down $1,500. So they are definitely making a clear jump between these models as you drop down. Uh, so, but at least you're getting an extra channels when you go from the 6700H to the 8500H. With the next model down, we're getting to 11 channels of processing with the 4700H at $2,000, so dropping down $1,000, 9 channels of amplification, 125 watts per channels, 2 channels driven, 8 ohms. And this is a similar series as the 6700H, just those less channels, less amplification. The door still opens to expose that, so we still get that in the 4700H. But moving to the X3700H, we're only dropping down $500 in this case. We no longer have the hidden door. The phono jack is right there on the front, nothing to open. And you're still at 11 channels of processing, still 9 channels of amplification, but only 105 watts per channel, 2 channels driven, 8 ohms for the 3700H. Moving down to the last in the X series, the X2700H, we're going from 11 to 8 channels of processing, 7 channels of amplification, 95 watts per channel into 8 ohms, 2 channel driven. And this is again dropping down $500 for this, and for the just under $1,000 at $999 for this unit. When you leave the 2700H series, you're going into the S series, and here you have, with their only S series 8K model, the S960H, $250 less than the lowest cost X series at $750. Again, it's an 8-channel processing. Again, 7 channels of amplification, but this time only 90 watts instead of 95 watts as we have in the entry-level X series. We start taking a look at these side by side and seeing how they've really got this into about 3 families, maybe 4, and I'll explain that in a second here. But the A810 and the X8500HA are very similar cosmetically. If you look at the front, they look the same except some colorization. The 6700H, the 4700H, they as well, they're a good pair. They're the same height, the same depth on these products, and they still have the door that opens up on them. And they're similarly, although one's 13 channels and one's 11. I've grouped in, as far as the cosmetic front of these, the 3700H with the 2700 and the S960H, because they look the same on the front. Here they've got rid of the door that opens up, and again the size of these is similar on the products. But if you look at the interiors of these, we'll slide the 3700H into that center grouping because it more closely resembles from the inside the 4700H and the 6700H as far as the power supply, as far as the organization, etc. Now I think they all have almost the same HDMI board, although the one in the 2700 and the 960H looks a little different there, but very similar. But interiorly, when you look at the inside, you can clearly see why the flagship models get a premium price. These are definitely premium layouts. And then when we look later on at the specifications, how much heavier these units are. So this should give you a good picture of the kind of the classes of products that Denon has put out here. looking into now the full comparison between these models, we run from the entry level, which is 5.1.2 or 7.1, depending on how you configure it. And remember, when we colorize this infographic with blue speakers, that means you have a choice whether you're going to use heights or rear surrounds or whatever the trade-off might be. Up to the fully enabled 8500 or A110 at 2.4, at 9.2.4 configurations, fully amplified, so you don't need any external amplification. So that's denoted in the orange. That means full processing for those, full amplification with the orange. If we look at something like the 6700H, this is kind of unique, and I really group this off by itself because it's the only model that has these configurations. In fact, this is the only one that in the manual is the only one that goes up to 0.6 on the ceiling heights. They say with external amplification, you could actually put a third set of heights in here for 7.2.6, or you can reconfigure it for 9.2.4 and determine whether you're going to use front wides or not. And then with that choice and that trade-off, are you, and there's only a couple configurations where they allow front wides. So you have to look at the manual very closely there. And when you do that, you are using external amplification in a lot of cases there. So look at that when you need the external amplification on that model. It's really particular. The 3700 and 4700 are very similar because you're trading off here between 5.2.4 and 7.2.2. So in this case, you still have the capability of doing heights, determine whether you're doing 2 or 4 height channels. These models do still have independent subwoofer, so you get .2 on those all the way up through the flagship. The lower end models, the 2700 and the 960, only have one controllable output, although they got 2 physical on the back. They're wired in parallel, so only one volume control, etc. on that. But on these 37 and 4700, you got that trade-off between those 2 and 4 channels on the heights, but then you lose your rear surrounds when you want to put 4. So it's, while it's fully powered internally, you have to make that choice. Rear surrounds with 2 heights or no rear surrounds with 4 heights. When you move up the higher models, you don't have to make that compromise. Looking at this as well, they all have 1/4-inch phono jacks, which is great, even though some are hidden under the door. Not all of them have the RS-232. We'll look at that later. They all have removable IEC power cords except for the S series. So S series, it's going to be a hardwired power cord. They all have an AM/FM tuner in it. For the most part, they're giving you USB. They're giving you Bluetooth in and out, except for I don't see in the manuals for the X8500 and A110 the ability to use Bluetooth headphones or Bluetooth speakers, which is a little odd. I think they're saying you put in a Bluetooth adapter or something, and the manual at least doesn't cover it like it does in the other ones. They're all Wi-Fi and Ethernet enabled, so that's good. Looking at the formats here, they all have the base of Dolby Atmos, DTS:X across the whole board. The models 6700 on up are the only ones that give you DTS:X Pro, and from the 4700H up, you got Aural 3D. So we've got models here that cover all the major formats. So if you're willing to go to the upper end, you get all the more major formats, which is unique. You don't see a lot of this in the marketplace. They even have IMAX Enhance in the 3700H on up, Dolby Vision across the board. They all use their Odyssey room correction, which is perceived as middle of the road, behind Dirac and others. None of them have THX certification, as we've mentioned in earlier videos. It's only seen in the Onkyo. Only Onkyo is the only receivers today with THX. If that's important to you, you might be an Onkyo person. Looking at the I/O, pretty robust here. They all have 7.3 on the 3700 on up, 7 in, 3 output on the HDMI, which is really good. It's kind of the higher counts out there. On the lower models, 6 in, 2 out, which is still really good. They all have eARC, which are real positive. 2 and 2 on the coax optical, 2 optical, 2 coax, except on the bottom tier, which is only 1 coax. None of them have any XLR I/O whatsoever. So no AES EBU, no pre-inputs, no pre-outputs on XLR. When you are on the pre-outs, they do pretty well. The flagships give you a full 15.2 out. They also give you a 7.1 in. But that's where the inputs end. So if you do have another source that's doing surround decoding, you'll have to go to one of the higher models to get the 7.1 inputs. Otherwise, there's no multi-channel inputs on the other models. The 6700 is a 13.2 pre-out. The 4700 is 11.2 pre-out, as well as the 3700. The 2700 and the S960 do not give you pre-outputs. So if you want to do external amplification of your fronts or something like that, they're only giving you subwoofer output. So you're kind of stuck with those amplifiers that are in there, or you're upgrading a few years down the road if you want to upgrade your amplifiers. They all have zone outputs except for the S series. 2 channels of 2 zones of output on the 4700 on up. Denon is sticking on with composite component inputs and outputs, and so you have as many as 4 video inputs and 2 outputs on the composite. The component is up to 3 in, 1 out. So for those who still have some legacy devices, there you go. You have some. They all have a moving magnet phono preamp. And they all have infrared and trigger inputs. And they all have a trigger output. Now some have a few more. Is the higher end models for 4700 up have also a second trigger output, and they also have infrared outputs on the 2700 on up. So fairly good a selection of I/O if you're not looking for balanced connections. Now on to the DACs, and this is where it gets a little interesting. Now on the flagship A110, we understand that was originally released with an AKM 4490 chip, and they're sticking with it. But if you go to the 8500 HA, now this was originally, I think, before the A variant that came out in June, was also a 4490. Now they've moved to ESS 9010 chips. The reason being is because the ACAM fire, these chips are in short supply. So I think they got enough to handle their flagship model, but not enough for the more mainstream collection there. With that, you take a hit in the performance of the chip. You lose 8 dB on the signal to noise, which was 116 dB, which would have been 120 dB. The THD has gone from 112, down. So you lose performance there, and the PCM conversion, albeit it's the output that matters. And this is what we've talked about in the past here. And so while they switched out the chip, the processor on the models from the 4700 on up have the same reported specification of 102 dB output and at 0.05% total harmonic distortion with a PCM decoding up to 24-bit 192, even though the DACs are more capable of that. Same goes with the DSD support. That's DSD 64 via the HDMI port. And so, while they're swapping out the chips, they're still reporting the same specification. Now, we do have reports as you switch chips. You do hear some things sonically a little different. Some people can hear it better than others. Just keep that in mind, that you may be taking a little hit with these the chip changes. On the other models, the 3700 through the 6700, these were AKM 4458 chips, and now they've moved to a Texas Instrument, which was Burt Brown. The PCM 5102A chips are in there now. And again, you take a hit. So it's going from 112 dB, you're dropping down to 112 dB from there. So yeah, it's interesting, and we don't see any published DSD support on the Texas Instrument website, but they're still claiming support for DSD, so we'll assume that's still in there. We don't even know what chips are in the entry-level models for the X series and the S series, but they do have lower specifications. We take the 3700 on down. These are 100 dB signal-to-noise output at 0.08 THD, but they're still going to give you the 192 hertz PCM decoding in DSD 64. As we noticed earlier, all of these support Ethernet, all support Wi-Fi, all support Bluetooth input as a source from your phone, but we don't see any notification that they're supporting Bluetooth output on the flagship models, which is a little odd. They didn't upgrade their circuitry on that when they came up with those models. Looking at video, and we already talked about the number of channels you get on these, but you got to pay close attention. While these are 8K enabled receivers, they're not delivering 8K on all the inputs. In fact, they're only delivering it on one. So your 2.1 is limited to just a single input, which is unlike some other brands like Onkyo and Yamaha and Pioneer that are putting it across more channels. So where you have 7, channels 6 will be 2.0 and 1 will be 2.1 enabled. So keep that in mind. It's only for one. For you heavy gamers who have an Xbox and a Sony PlayStation 5, you only got one. HDCP is 2.3. They're all eARC, as we said before. For the best input, you are getting that 120 hertz, which is coming with the new chipsets, and the 60 hertz on the 8K. They're all HDR10, and as well as supporting HDR10 Plus for your Samsung enabled TVs. Dolby Vision, as said before, it only takes you down to the 3700H IMAX across the board. We don't see any reports that they support HLG, hybrid log gamma, or Rec 2020, but we wouldn't be surprised if that came with a firmware update. Now, if you have one of the older versions of the same models, these are ones manufactured before May of this year. These can be confirmed by looking at the serial number. Those with the end code less than 70,001 are impacted by bugs in the HDMI set. So it impacts a lot of different models. All of these that are mentioned here in this. I didn't note earlier that some of the European models, and you might see this in other countries as well, can be slightly different. Instead of being AVR, they're AVC, etc. So pay attention to that. But you do have two options to address these on the older models. There's a free fix, which is the SPK618 adapter, which is available. You go onto the Denon website, fill out the form, and they'll send you this to you. They're trying to discourage it in case if you don't use 8K. They say, oh, don't bother, but a lot of us just want it, right? Or you can get a totally new HDMI board if you don't want this external device at $599. They have a whole process for this. We outlined this in an earlier video that we delivered, and so that is available. Continuing on with our analysis, we look now at the control support that these models have, and it's pretty universal across the range here and extensive, right? So looking at voice control, etc., Denon has a pretty strong support here. Now, it's not always obvious from their website and materials which things they support. A little digging though, and you do find it's pretty extensive. Voice control available for Alexa, Google, and Josh IO directly, Siri through the Apple Play 2 interface. They all have an Ethernet base where you can control the protocol with the IR. We already talked about the counts with IR and triggers that each support, of course, less so in the more entry models, and all with a 232 connection, although I think going forward, not as many integrations are going to be done with that legacy type interface. Now, if you look into the manuals for these, they're not going to list which control platforms they integrate with, Control 4, Savant, RTI, etc. But if you go into the individual websites, now I did do this with some of the other videos, but I did give them an all yes here, because if you do, there's explicitly list Denon. I think everybody wants to integrate with Denon because they're such a popular brand. So you do see through all these systems the integrations there. So if you're looking to do theater integration, home integration, there is definitely a lot of support there. Now turning to the streaming ecosystems, these all support AirPlay 2 and Spotify Connect. I couldn't see Chromecast. I did read some reports that people have had luck putting a Chromecast device into the HDMI port, although I'm not going to give them credit for Chromecast support because you need that external device to make that work. No support listed for Sonos. I guess there's probably a little workaround for that as well. These are all Roon tested. Spotify Connect, as we said, I didn't see any support for DTS Play-Fi. Of course, these all have the HEOS, Denon HEOS support, and a lot of the integrations come through that operating system being built into these models, which gives you a lot of streaming support from Amazon Prime, Apple Music through AirPlay 2, Deezer, Napster, Pandora, SoundCloud, Spotify, SiriusXM, Tidal, and for internet radio, where you get tuned in. Now, there's no MQA support there. I think the Blue Sound is probably one of the few that has that. YouTube Music, Qobuz did not have any support listed as at the moment, but of course these are things that could get added in time. The remotes, you do see some variance between the classes of receivers. Their top tier all has that LCD screen that's built into it. It seems like the LCD screen on the 8500 and the A110 are backlit for the screen, but I didn't see where the buttons were backlit. They look translucent, but I don't believe there's a backlit. Some of the reports, a lot of people are reporting in their disappointment that it isn't. And you see that the 6700 and 4700 share a similar remote, if not the same. and then the 3700 down the line there, I'll share the same. So 3 classes of remotes that are delivered with these units. As far as the physical, you could probably assume from the pictures shown earlier, that between the 3 classes here, you got 3 different sizes. They're all 17.1, 434 millimeters wide. The height of these varies from the 6.6 inch, 167 millimeter height in the everything but the flagship models. The flagship models are 7.7 inches high, or 195 millimeters, and the depth varies from 13.4 inch, 341 millimeters, up to 19 inches deep with the flagship models, 482 millimeters. The weight ranges from 21 pounds, 9.5 kilograms, up to a whopping 56 pounds. And that's to be expected because there's 13 channels of amplification, 25.4 kilograms in the flagship models. Power consumption traces these as you would expect. The lowest on the entry models, 460 watts, up to 900 watts consumption in the flagship. I did see some discrepancies, and I don't know if this is true, because to me, the 8500 and the A110 are identical, even with their power supplies, etc. I see one Denon resource saying that they have the same weight of, and it's somewhere between 52 and 56 pounds. In other cases, the manuals are showing different, so I don't know what the true story is there. We're just assuming they're the same because there's nothing to indicate those would weigh differently. The user interfaces on these, we see 3 basic variants in the layouts. So the flagship models down to the 4700, you get that door style that opens up. The buttons inside there are laid out very much the same. The display is the same. In fact, I think the display is the same even on the entry-level models. It's just those buttons are placed differently when you go through this. The software side of this is pretty much the same, whether depending on the models. Just if you don't have a feature, then they'll take that off. But it's the same choice of, you got HEOS playback, with the app for either Android or Apple iOS, and it looks pretty good. And you have on the configuration and playback through the unit, it's the on-screen display. Well, that wraps it up for the Denon lineup, and I hope this series has helped you with your decision making, and certainly refer back to the other videos we did for Yamaha, Onkyo, and Pioneer, and compare them. Now we're going to wrap this all up at the end and do a side-by-side with all the different brands and how they compare. But we have a few more to do after this. I think the next one we're going to do is Marantz, maybe followed by Macintosh and a few others that have had some enhancements, changes in the last year since we've done this. So this is going to keep you up to date. What are your thoughts on the Denon lineup? Is one HDMI input sufficient, or do you need more? Are you waiting for Denon to come out with yet another series that will bring it maybe on par with the number of I/O HDMI inputs that are 8K capable? That feedback would be useful to the RipeWave Audio community, and if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this RipeWave Audio community, and be sure to hit that bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.